Anybody else? All right. So, start the Pledge of Allegiance.
Remain standing, yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If we remain standing, as we have a yesterday, Sunday, the 17th, was the 20th anniversary of the tragic events of the Flight 800, TWA Flight 800 crash, where 230 people on board were killed, including 3 Great Irvington residents, Caitlin, Janet, and Jack O'Hara. As most of you know, their legacy has been the O'Hara Foundation, which has done an unbelievable amount of good work in the village of Irvington for all different age groups, obviously working closely with the recreation department, as well as obviously the kind of pinnacle being the naming rights of the O'Hara Nature Center, where their legacy and memory can live on in a great environment. So thanks for all they've done, and we remember them with sadness and happiness of the legacy that's come after the tragedy, or come out of the tragedy. So join me in a moment of silence. Thank you.
No, it's just some little things going on during the week. If you didn't have a chance to see it yesterday, a few of us placed a wreath at the Nature Center in memory of them, and it was pretty nice because the entire family pretty much shared it throughout. So we've been getting comments, a lot of private messages from people thanking us for not forgetting. So that was one. And tonight before the Irvington boys game, and tomorrow night before the Irvington girls game in the O'Hara Summer League, there'll be a moment of silence before the game, each of the games. And then throughout the week, we're going to, on the Irvington Rec page, just post a few things reminding people of what's actually going on in the 20 years and what the foundation has meant and done for Irvington. So it was nice. I know spoke to Peggy O'Hara yesterday, as I know Greg did also, and the family is so grateful that Irvington has never forgotten and keeps the memory alive. So,
and one other interesting point on the whole tragedy is that Kevin Gallagher was one of the main divers who's with the NYPD dive team. He worked on that day after day after day after day. On recovering pieces.
We all reminisce yesterday. Where were we? I got a phone call from Matt Arone, who was then the team director in Irvington, and Brian and Matt, the brothers, stayed behind because they were playing on our travel baseball team and didn't accompany Jack and Janet to Paris. And Matt had a friend in the sports industry who knew for some reason Jack was on the flight, and he called Matt, who called me, and then it was just like you just kept getting calls all throughout. So the support Irvington gave the family was quite amazing. And I remember about a month after, sitting around at the Benjamin Center with a group of people, and everybody trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we remember them? And the theater came up with some things that they pursued, and then the O'Hara basketball tournament was created. And they've given us back probably, I was trying to figure it out today, it's probably close to between $350,000 and $400,000, including the Nature Center, that's come back to us through the foundation and the family. So it's pretty amazing. The best part of the tragedy is all the special friends you made. We've made quite a few, so thanks for remembering.
Sure.
I asked Larry for a moment tonight because I know maybe I did a bad job on this, but one of the requests I had from the IASC chairs, Allison Felix and Tanya Hunt, before we broke for the summer, was, Joe, please do whatever you can to pursue the sign at the bottom of the hill. And just to give a brief history, as you know, the grant, that is the Irvington grant, has done amazing work in its first 2 years. And we continue to try to find ways to do things. And the partnership with the school district has surpassed, I think, what we ever thought it could be. The school allowing us to do surveys with the students, speakers, parent-children events, prom support, conferences. I mean, it's just amazing, and we still have, a lot of work to do. One of the big things that the IAS committee is trying to do is continue to brand, just like, and I'll go back, in the sports world, for the 15 years after the O'Hara tournament started, when you heard the word O'Hara, everybody knew it meant basketball. It meant the tournament was coming. Well, IASC is looking for something that when a parent or a child or an educator or a business hears IASC, they know it's going to be connected to the grant. So trying to brand ourselves has been important. We all know the struggles we have of getting airtime, as we call it, on the bulletin boards at the top of the hill. So the idea came up to have another bulletin board at the bottom of the hill. And I contacted Larry and I said, gee, what do you think? And Larry's initial reaction was, he says, I think the board would be in favor of something like that. They've been thinking about it for quite a while. I said, so can I pursue it? And he said, absolutely. So what we did is we then, and I just would like to share these. I don't have too many copies because our color printer is not the best.
You can share.
And Larry's wasn't working, so. But I do have more Pokemon flyers if you need them. I just wanted to wait for everybody's. I do have an extra one here. I think I did do it. So I think what might have been misrepresented was that the sign was going to be either specifically or almost always used for the grant and for their messaging. And if that was the message, that was not properly conveyed by me. What I meant to represent was whenever there was not the need for signage or there wasn't events coming up, that IASC would create some of their branding, some of their messages, whether it be about marijuana or alcohol, that whenever there was an open spot, we would have pre-made signs that would simply go up until somebody else needed to use it. But the expectation of the sign was that it would be run the way the one at the top of the hill is run, that the signs come in. We prefer 2 4x4s, so there's 2 things up, major times or major events. We could put an 8x4 up, and they come to us. If we can fit them, we put them up. We always try to get people as close to their event as we can, and they're willing to pay for the whole thing. So, when Larry said there was some concern from the board side that it might not be the right thing, I wanted to just make sure if you were going to say no, that you understood. Trying to figure out what might have been the problem. I thought one, again, was the possibility that you thought it was only going to be used by the grant. And again, that's not true. I've given you some examples of some of the signs. The other thing that came up in a discussion was, and please excuse me if I don't appreciate it the way others were, but blocking the cement and the glass windows there may have been a concern. So as you can see, we've shifted the sign, in this make-believe, rendering, if you will, to try to meet some of those concerns. I mean, the signage is consistent with what we have in front of Town Hall, and it would, look similar. The options for how you put signs up is if they were 4x4 on the coroplast, you would simply use pull ties to put them up. But yet, if you look closely at the front, you can see where you see 4 little circles. Those are if you had a banner instead of a coroplast, you could connect the banner to those 4 corners. So obviously, you're all smart enough to know the significance of the bottom of the hill and what that spot looks like. It's why we have a Slow Down Irvington sign there right now. So I'd ask you to reconsider because I think this is would be a good thing. One of the things that's gotten so much better, thanks to Greg Allen, who's just an amazing guy and has, just been a great partner in his few short years here. I mean, we never had access to the theater board. I mean, you would have had
you would have had to put a sign up that, I don't even want to try to make up something. But it was hard to ever get something there. And Greg, if he's got time, if he's got space, he's taking care of the farmer's market sign for us this summer, which means we don't have to take it up and down. So, right now, we got 4 spots up there for 4x4s. We have a terrible, dilapidated built sign in front of the rec, which we're trying to replace. And I might even be willing to do 2. If you say no, that's where I'm going to ask them to put their sign. But I think the grant is important. I think its message is extremely important. I think letting it be at the bottom of the hill and then allowing everyone to get use. And how does it work? Brian brings me a sign. He's got a theater event coming up, and it's in 3 weeks. Christina brings me a sign. She's got a rec event coming up in 2 weeks. Well, the rec sign's going to go up first, and when it comes down, Brian's sign goes up. Again, with the help of the use of the theater board from time to time, we've had much less problems making people happy. It used to be one of the least favorite jobs I had, is to decide whose sign was important enough and whose wasn't, and whose looked good and who didn't, and whose words were too little or too big. It would be nice to have another place. So, again, I think, we've got a new person in the chamber who's got a lot of energy, and I can see taking advantage of this board. I can see it for events, for holidays. I can see IAS getting their message across for their events. So I don't expect an answer, but I would ask you to please give this some thought, because I know it's extremely important to the committee. Not only the executive board, who really was just gung-ho about the idea of having this sign there, but I know the entire CAB membership was hoping that this was going to happen. And, one of the things we hoped is that as we got ready for our first meeting in September, it would be the very first sign that got put up there announcing that it was there, and again, just be available to everyone. So that's why I'm here, in addition to teaching you about Pokemon.
Number 94.
So if anyone has, any, objective, rationale, I personally didn't have much of an issue with the sign, so I'm not really the one to talk to. So for those that did maybe want to talk about why they don't want the sign, or
I'm not comfortable with that. I mean, I ask branding at one of the gateways when we have plans for doing wayfinding signage that's Irvington historic branding. I think it's much more appropriate to have it by the rec center, personally.
I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
What part of it didn't you understand?
There
is if you look at the Main Street streetscape plan, there's a whole section about creating signage for the historical district and for the village in general, but Main Street, and a key component of it is the signage down at the train station. Some of it would be sharing conceptually what this is, which is information for the public, but a lot of it is also signage for, how to get around when you get off the train, where you're going, how to get to, where the Red Hat is, where Bridge Street is, where the library, whatever the signage that tells you where to go in the community. So the point is that I have like 3 specific concerns, one of which is I don't want to have something sort of put into place that isn't in concert with an overall design, shall we say, an overall plan for down there, because then it becomes legacy and no one wants to remove it or change its location. We are working right now on a RFP for wayfinding signage component for Main Street and down to the train station.
So that's close to happening.
Well, close to being let out, right? I mean, but first, I'm not done yet. So I told you that was one concern. The second concern is that I do have concern about where it should be. I'm not sure if I know that actually moving it to in front of the open area is the best. I don't know. I mean, I would actually have to go down and look and see what a 9-foot high sign would, by whatever the length of it is. It's about 9 by 9, I guess, as the exposed surface. I just have to see what that looked like.
Is there significance to blocking the building?
I'm actually less concerned about blocking the building than other people were. I'd be a little bit more concerned about if we are blocking the view through. That might be a river view. I don't know what that view is like over the green.
Well, which was why originally wasn't.
I understand that. So I'm not sold on the repositioning. I was not quite as off on, specifically hiding the building didn't bother me, but the fact that it was there as a, without any consideration for the overall plan for signage down at that corner was what concerned me the most initially. So because of what had been talked about in the streetscape plan. And I guess the third thing was just that I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with having a sign that's branded by I Ask Initiative.
I could add a little.
Well, just, if I may, just.
It's an extension of that
Oh, wait, can I
discussion.
just
Sure.
want to ask a question to Mark on that. The IAS branding, it may be one of the most important things that the village has done in many years, which is to find something that's working with the children and the teens in this community, trying to make them happy and healthier and understand more about drugs and learn about alternatives. I mean, it is a critical part of what we do. And again, the way the school district has bought into it. So I think its significance is far greater than you may be giving it credit for.
No,
And
I don't particularly like the idea of it being done there.
Okay.
And so I think if you want to have a branded sign about I Ask next to the rec center, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to get, a little history on this, because it's been a long time in coming to have an integrated signage plan. And I remember Ken Bernstein sitting here, and he's been here for a while, and that discussion of how to make signage in the village, there was the Business Improvement Committee, and some of that discussion happened way back then. And I thought all of this would be done in 2 years. But the cost of it, the organization of it, the master plan, all of this has taken forever to get it going. So the idea is not, and I hope you communicated to IASC, that it is not to denigrate their work. I think it's incredibly important and wonderful. But I don't think that this fits with this, I'm going to say, 8-year effort to get an integrated plan that we are now hiring the professional. That's the RFP. That was part of the discussion 8 years ago. Then it got into the master plan, for the streetscape. And now, all these little dribs and drabs of money finally coming together. So it's going to be coordinated, the signage with the aqueduct crossing, with the theater project, and with the whole connection with the, $10,000 for the benches. All of this is part of an integrated plan. And the use of that space is for, as Mark was saying, to be designed by a professional and to coordinate with the other signage that's part of this whole effort. I certainly can see putting something up, by the rec department, and how about, periodically using the banner for different messages. I mean, we should, all agree on what that is. Right now, it's Slow Down Irvington, but sometimes switching things out would be appropriate. I don't know which things are, but I feel strongly that if we start undoing our master plan, it just doesn't serve the vision of the look of and the success of Main Street as a whole.
And that look's been selected?
Well, the look for much of it, if you go back to the master plan and you look at what's in there, that part is done. But the actual format of the fonts and, the kind of edges and the way that's all going to be planned by a professional rather than I mean, Sign Extreme is their business, but they're not design people
So
who
you
are
don't,
looking at.
you don't have the look you could give us so that the sign could be made to fit what you think the
No,
rest of
that's
your.
not determined yet, and I have to say that, I agree with Mark that this particular, very, important community effort, it doesn't seem appropriate for that spot. It doesn't, it's not the only important thing, but the plan from way back was to make sure it was a wayfinding sign.
Right, and in all due respect, I've heard about signage in Main Street
I know.
for 31 years.
I've heard about it for none.
Okay, so
That's why I'm still here on the board.
I do, I absolutely
So
do,
don't
but
beat us over the head if we don't agree with you.
that's not what I'm doing. What I'm trying to say is if there's going to be time, we're talking about a sign, we're not talking about building a foundation with a house on it. So if you put the sign there and your work was still a long ways away, then the sign could simply be moved, if that was the case.
Is that going to be possible? Because, I mean, I was thinking of that as possible moving forward, because why
But it
not?
was an option to consider.
But would there be, the problem is you don't want to have the thing that it becomes like, oh, well, we can't move that sign because it's been there for the last 3 years. I'm assuming, I don't know that it's going to take 3 years to get a sign in, let's say 18 months.
Well, Mark, just like this board has the decision whether it goes up or not, the board would have the decision whether it gets moved or not. Because the grant and the CAB is your body. It is created by this board. So again, if nothing's going to go up for a while, okay, and the sign went up and we could show that it could be moved, I'd ask for, look, I have to go back and report to my board.
I'm okay with that.
Right, okay. I have to go back and report to my board. I have to tell them the reasons you gave, and I have to explain it to them. So one of the things I thought of is, again, if things do get slowed down, okay, if you're not able to move quickly, and that primary spot can be used to get a lot of messaging out, why not take advantage of it if we can show you that it can then be moved at the appropriate time when you tell us to
Can I
move.
have a question? Have you given any thought to where else it might be put?
Well, one of the options was to try to put it somewhere on the school district property, but be very honest with you, most of the money we've spent has been geared towards the school. I'm trying to find some ways to use the grant money that we benefit from, that's here, that's ours. So the locations, the rec center would be location number one, because again, it just makes sense. And we're looking at new signage now as we get ready to approach our capital projects that we'll be doing over the next couple of months. Another thought was to approach Field Point to see if they have any interest in putting it on their side of the top of the hill. The other possibility was to take down our sign at the top of the hill, which is in pretty bad shape, and replace it with this, but then the theater sign and this sign would look different, and I don't know if the funding is there to do both. We haven't looked too far because in all honesty, when we came up with the idea and we knew the spot wasn't used and we weren't as aware of the work that had gone into it, we just saw it as taking an area that, if you look at, it's pretty ugly. It's not something,
It's been explained in great detail what the concerns are with this kind of a sign there, given the overall plan. When I first saw this, I thought, great, that sounds terrific. And then I listened to and read what Connie and Mark had to say, and I understand what you're saying, 31 years, we haven't had a sign yet, what are the chances of something happening in the future? But I also understand a tremendous amount of work has gone into making the vision happen, where there will be consistent signage and consistent streetscape elements. So my feeling is that this is wonderful, and can you come back to us with maybe one or two thoughts of where else it might go? And I'm not particularly offended if it goes, if this also benefits school district. This is primarily a group, I should emphasize, that benefits kids, wants to send them a very positive message. I think we don't need to have competing goods here.
No.
This is a good thing. Let's figure out a really good place to put it so it's not in the way of another good thing.
There's no question the rec center property is
great, yeah.
There's not even a close second.
So that's
Unless,
great.
and the only way I would say unless, is if both signs at the top of the hill got redone.
Okay.
But along those lines too, and the reason I asked before if you had any schematics or any thoughts or any idea of what you were doing is, I'd rather get a sign that'll fit what you're looking at than make a sign up that may not fit what you're
That would
thinking
be
about,
great.
so.
I
That's,
also,
that's coming, right? We're getting into
yes, I mean,
design.
the RFP is, I mean, I worked on it, Larry worked on it, it's on its way out. Another thought is, at somewhere near to, there's gonna be some reason why this isn't possible, I know, but, where all the sports, events are down in your parks, near the senior center, or where all those people who are bringing their kids to those sporting events could see a sign.
There's a new sign in the plans for that.
Okay, so that,
But it's not a message board,
yeah.
really.
And also, I wanted to make sure that you knew that in this RFP, as we asked to hire such a person who designed all this, one of the things we specifically asked for was a community, I called it bulletin board, or notice board, or information board within the system. So I would think that events that IAS does would piggyback on that, and they would use it. And,
Sure they would.
and all of this together will end up being a branding for the whole village, which should be good for everyone.
Sure.
So, I know it's been long, and I know, people end up giving up and saying these things are never gonna happen, but, I think having put so much effort and money into this plan, we don't wanna, undo it at this stage where we really are making full. We've got 3 grants related to this, well, 4, no, 3, with the benches, the theater, the aqueduct crossing. A lot of money coming in because of this plan, and I think we just have to be patient and not give up on it. That's the,
So Connie, what's your feeling about a temporary placement? 6, 12, 18 months, well, whatever it takes to get down the chute on the.
If you thought it was less than 2 years, I don't think it would be worth putting up.
I'm not,
Right.
I'm not crazy about
It's gonna be
that.
less than
Do you have an alternative in mind?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to
Our
undo.
property, right in front of the big pickle tree.
So you could put it there for a year, and then when the final design plan is executed, you could move it.
Oh, sure. Maybe they'd give us money to put another one up.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah, I mean, again, not knowing you had made the progress you made, again, in seeing the slow Irvington sign down, it just seemed like an obvious choice for someone who was willing to not take a penny out of our pocket to make it happen.
if I can give my opinion, I mean, I don't have a problem with this board. The only thing is I kind of prefer it in front of the building as opposed to blocking, because I do think it blocks the view of the train and the river. It's such a high traffic, high visibility area. And because there isn't anything there right now, I think it's okay. But I do agree with Connie and Mark. I wouldn't want it to conflict. I think it's important to have something cohesive down there.
I
I
understand
wouldn't want to
fully.
conflict
Yeah.
with that, but I think if that space is going to remain vacant for a year or so, I don't know why we wouldn't make use of it, because it's such a, again, high visibility area.
Are there plans for the slow Irvington banner? I mean,
It's just been forgotten about down there.
Oh, okay.
It's just in with stakes, it's temporary.
Well, it was put up well, because it hasn't moved at all.
No, thank
I don't know who did that. Jimmy?
Yeah,
It was
he
put
did a
up.
good
it was
job.
put up
I mean,
hard.
think about how many people have seen that. I mean,
There's, in terms of, I know the traffic committee talking about it, they're more than willing to have that thing come down for a while and sort of change the visuals, because people are getting
You
inured
start
to
to
it.
see
So
something all the time.
the idea of putting something else down there is not, you shouldn't feel blocked at all.
No, maybe until your step or your next step is done, whoever asks, they should follow the same sizing and the same pattern. That's there now because it stays low and it's still
Yeah.
visible,
And the stakes are there now.
and the stakes are there now. And Jimmy still works for us.
Right. I'm very supportive of that, swapping out the banners.
I'm in favor of that under one condition. I don't want to be in charge of who picks which banners go up.
Okay. We'll form a committee.
I appreciate your listening. Again, I was asked by Allison and Tanya to get more information. That's why I'm here. I have more, I'll bring it back. And since you think it's going to be less than 2 years, I don't think putting a sign in that would be moved makes the most sense. I think the approach of using the Slow Irvington banner down, if anyone has something they want to put in. And if the committee still agrees to pay for it, I'm going to ask them to put it in front of the rec center, so.
Sounds good. So, also,
And we emphasize, we are very appreciative of the willingness to put up with this, and we totally support what the advisory board does, we totally support their message. Again, this is just a question of what's the right place for it.
Maybe we can get an I ask banner to put down there in
Yeah.
September.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. That they'll pay for it.
So we don't have our whole schematic up.
Good luck.
Those are all red out.
You're not coming? I can help you learn how to get your Pokeballs ready to catch the Pokemon. No? Have a good evening, thank you for your time.
how are you?
It is a screenshot.
I've got to do that. All you need is a phone.
Yeah. You throw the.
If Christina will teach me how to
It
do
uses,
it, I'll
it
try.
uses your camera, and you see the little Pokemon,
Right.
like in front of the tree, and then you throw the ball at it.
And then you walk into traffic.
Then you walk with a tree like this.
Yeah.
Pedestrian safety.
You can see people doing it.
That's what we need to promote this.
They will. They're walking into
Are there ones in
the
Irvington?
lakes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
So if it's here, people might come thronging
They might come
in.
in.
Here?
Yeah.
Like if it were here right now on the dais?
It could be right here. If you look around and it shows you where it is, so then you
Maybe
find it, you
that's
throw
where
the
we
ball
can
out.
It
get
could be in the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly right. It could be.
There could be one in the tunnel.
There's probably multiples, and then there's gyms or something.
But who decided where they went?
Well, actually, businesses can buy, they're called lures.
Oh.
Yeah.
And like there are restaurants that have bought them to attract them.
Which is controversial.
So we could buy one and get lots of people in here.
How to get people to come to work?
Our meetings, all the young people.
Maybe, might take shield.
Okay,
Sorry.
sorry, we digress.
Priorities are Pokemon.
Okay,
Okay. Worldwide.
why don't we do the traffic calming thing?
First?
Why don't we do the word priorities first unless we have a
Well,
real
because
time?
Alice is here, we got this little
Okay, but can we have some
request
sort
for
of
traffic.
I don't think, I think the,
I think it's gonna be about 15
I
minutes.
think the request for traffic calming, yeah, that'd be quick, right?
Yeah, let's do traffic calming.
And then we do have one other thing that's not on the list here that's gonna come after priorities, so I'm gonna have to make sure we have 5 minutes.
Oh, something else? Yeah, okay, here we go.
All right.
Ready, set, traffic calming.
All right, so what are we talking
So
about?
the two items on here, there was a few items that were on the various lists of things to be done from the traffic committee, recommendations from the traffic committee. And one of the items relates to implementing a school zone speed limit along Station Road. And then I also, we didn't specifically talk about Dallas Lane, but I took the liberty of including that as well. So the first, there's maps attached. Do you have backup?
What's that?
There's a couple of maps attached. You got it. Okay. So the first map is a little, I know it's hard to read, but that is a picture of Station Road on the top. And
This is station.
Yeah, the straight
Yeah.
ups.
Okay, all right.
And
This
it's
is
a-
top.
yeah, the tunnel's to the right.
Little Croton.
Buckhouse Street's to the left. And these are the horseshoe streets of Oak and Willow, I guess.
Yeah.
So the distances are just very rough, measured out to a total, the school zone can be a total of 1,320 feet long. So it made some sense to center that on the top of the horseshoe or the bottom of the horseshoe, however you're looking at it.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
And then go out in each direction. So it gives you an idea of where the actual legal school zone could be. You'll pick up, a few hundred feet on Station Road in each direction, as well as the entire horseshoe,
It
which is
can't
probably
be greater than this. This is the max.
1320, a quarter of a mile. I mean, you could do it all in one direction if you wanted, but I mean,
Well, yeah, so, because I don't have a clue from this, where is the current major crosswalk at? Is it at Maple
it's near
Street
Maple, yeah,
or right after, before, I mean, it depends what direction you're going,
but
but
it's near Maple. I don't remember exactly.
because I mean, in some ways, I
Oh, this is better, yeah, okay.
I almost wonder if it makes sense to try to get that thing incorporated. Yeah, before we go to a long discussion, what is this telling us? What is the second drawing?
That's Dow's Lane, that's the other
See
side.
this?
That's
Better.
Dow's Lane itself.
Oh, Dow's Lane, okay, got
You
it.
could basically pick up the entire length of
This
Dow's
makes
Lane.
more sense by looking at it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm thinking though, for a lot of respects, trying to grab that major crosswalk would make a lot of sense to try to get that in too.
Look, the reality is you're not gonna, okay, so maybe the legal school zone doesn't extend all the way to Maple Street, but the reality is the sign's gonna be somewhere along the beginning part of that road.
That's what exactly.
So the effect that you want is pretty much there.
But, I mean, you get what I'm trying to get at, it's just like to,
Okay.
maybe, I'm not trying to say, to break the argument that it has to be symmetrical, I
No,
just,
it doesn't have to.
yeah.
Right.
So,
So draw, you think you.
Well, I mean, that's all I would say, is to try to.
Extend it out there, and it would basically eliminate anything on this side, so.
Just take this piece and put it down here.
Yes.
so Mark, you're suggesting the more westerly part should be longer?
Yeah, because that's got that major safe routes crosswalk there. Where, there's a major, it's got this, the white, the yellow signage, and it's got, it's been put in right at the corner. That's a corner of Maple, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. It is.
Okay. I don't have the data on this one, I'm just gonna throw out a thought, maybe that's, has a lot more validity than what I'm about to say, but in terms of cars building up speed, I mean, somewhere up here is the tunnel, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure Alice knows a lot about this too. But is there greater inclination to try to, speed up here, and then when you're here on the more westerly part, the traffic just isn't going as fast, whereas here they were really revving up, and the slowdown requirement here might be more effective. I'm
Okay,
throwing it
and
out as a
just
question.
one counter to that, because we've actually talked about this a bit in the traffic committee, and Alice, please speak up. That section that you're talking about is actually the most curvaceous section of
Okay.
Station Road, and you could put up, curved road speed limit warnings, like 15 mile an hour.
So not use the school zone to
Yeah.
slow it down, use curvy
Yeah.
roads.
In the curvy area.
Right, gotcha.
So coming out of the tunnel up to probably near Woodbine. I mean, I don't, I can't remember the exact configuration of the road, but it doesn't really straighten out until then.
Right, and you do have a stop sign in the
That's
middle.
Woodbine right
Yeah,
there, right?
Right.
So you could use a combination of tactics and get like
Just wanted to tell you.
probably, it's curvier.
Yeah, it's curvy here, got it, yeah.
So one thing also, remember, the police chief said to us, now I don't know if he said to us as a group, but when Walter and I and the traffic committee representative, who was just Mary Beth at the time, met with him, he might have said that to you also, Larry, but he mentioned about, the thing about those signs is they're not enforceable as for speeding. They're enforceable for, like,
It's,
unsafe driving. Yeah, so, so you could actually, marking that area like that, you could actually get someone for maybe even more for crossing yellow lines and stuff for, unsafe operation, I guess.
So the curvy, the sign that says like 15 curve,
Yeah.
and then the offense is like going across the middle line
Or just
or not
driving
using
above.
the.
Driving above 15 even would be an offense if it's seen to be, unsafe driving behavior of any sort.
And then use the extra feet down here partly because of the crosswalk and because there is no curvy thing down there. You couldn't do
I
anything
see
else.
people coming off of South Buckout and just starting to zoom right up Station Road right there, and you're like one block until that crosswalk. So to me,
Well, can we try it and see how effective it is? I mean, that seems to make sense.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, Mark, after throwing out my other idea.
but I agree with what you're saying,
Yeah.
is that side of Station Road shouldn't be ignored either. I would be, if we hadn't talked about the possibility of those
Curvaceous signs.
curved road warnings. Well, you could use both. You could use narrow curved road, right?
By the way, just
Narrow curvaceous
look
road.
at the page now, so that's how long, you heard the horn?
Yeah?
That's how long it takes to get the page. As
That's
a,
because this is a dead zone.
no,
No, it's not a dead zone.
that's just how long it takes sometimes to come through.
Okay.
It's usually much closer when I'm upstairs, so I think
Yeah,
it's.
Oh, it's when you hear the horn,
But yeah.
since he gets the paging,
it takes that long.
And Larry gets it also. You know what the problem is when that cord goes off. And if you're a volunteer, it's a question of how long does it take to get that message? So this was just a accidental test.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's quicker, so it's.
Because we've always heard that those people that live, 2 or 3 blocks west of here, who are volunteers,
That's a good question.
don't get it.
But it has to go in
quickly
front
or
of the
easily
school.
when that
I think so.
cord goes off. They don't know what it is,
I have to reread the whole section to see.
which is
whether
amazing in
actually
this
put-
technological age.
Maybe the school,
It's not really
that
strong
seems a
line.
little bizarre, but I wonder.
Yeah.
It's just, I was
Anyway,
telling
I'm-
Mark, I feel like,
Sorry.
I feel like it's, like, I feel like people, once they approach the school, I feel like they start to slow down anyway, so I feel like it would go to better use if it,
Yeah.
instead of, I
Maybe
mean,
you could have it on the station road.
yeah, like almost the length of Station Road.
Right.
But there's no one.
Well, no, there's no connection, but let me try to figure out if a connection is required, in fact.
Yeah.
So that's.
You don't need the school
It
zone
doesn't
here
have to
because
be, yeah.
how many people
Just
speak?
put a school storage box up in the corner so that it's like, they keep.
Satellite
Oh, yes. Can you move it? Can you move it?
I'll look into that.
Could we ask, maybe Mark knows or Alice knows, how do the residents of these, of Willow and Oak? Is this one Oak?
Oak.
Oak. Have they been in the conversation about this, or yes?
Yeah, they think people drive too fast.
And they would love to see something that would slow people down on their street.
They'll be incredibly happy.
On Willow and Oak proper, or even on that street? They
Well,
drive.
because they're trying to get the kids dropped off in time, or something.
Is that what happens?
So then maybe we could have to keep it there then.
Yeah.
So they,
Also, I haven't heard that complaint as much recently as just the complaint about, with people parked on the street and people aren't driving carefully enough and no sidewalk or whatever. Is there
No, there's
No
sidewalks.
sidewalks.
Yeah, both sides.
I mean, they'll be happy no matter what, because the fact that people are speeding down Station Road, they're upset about too. So it's a win-win. I don't think they're gonna care which way it's done.
do you have a point of view as to which would work better, living there and being involved?
I think Mark's right. At first, I thought the way you did, because that curve is so dangerous, that I thought, well, if we had the school zone before the curve, then people really would slow down. But maybe Mark's right, that people should know as soon as they engage in Station Road, right off the bat, this is the school zone. They're not gonna know when the school zone ends. They'll see this is the school zone right off the bat and slow down. So I think Mark's right.
When you're coming up the South Buckeye.
All right,
Well,
so-
look and see what there's even
I mean,
possible.
however it works out, people who know more about this than I do, I'm totally in favor of doing this.
The exact
As a great-
particulars,
Yeah, right.
the 100 feet on either side.
Yeah,
There's one thing I'd like to attach to this discussion, and Larry, you can tell me if this is the wrong time to attach, but the walking school bus folks had that comment about restricting parking, at least on one side of Dow's Lane especially during the morning hours of kids coming in, that there was a problem with safety because people were parked on both sides of Dow's Lane and the buses were trying to come in and out and they left absolutely no room for walking. Remember that?
No, I haven't had any discussions about that with Walter.
Is
Not
this-
on the short list of things to do.
That was probably under the rubric of the stuff that was triggered by, because what they had said was triggered by the walking, they wrote
Oh, the
a letter
email
to
from the
us.
walking school bus
Right,
lady.
so the two parts was the sidewalk down by, on the other side of the aqueduct toward Dow's Lane, and then the parking safety issue.
I'm getting a little Garfield.
No, but I'm working with Walter on the matters that the traffic committee wants to address. If you as a board want me to address something that came in a separate communication from the walking school bus people, then I'll do that. But I'm working on all these matters with Walter. So I'm not sure which way you want me to go with this.
I'll speak to Walter, because I didn't know he had dropped that off the list.
It's not on the list that I'm working on.
Okay. so that's good. We've had this discussion. We know.
Yeah, so that part's set.
Okay,
The
this
second
is-
part of this is,
The radar guns.
yes, the first.
Oh, the radar stuff, okay.
Right,
What's
so
the
the
story
traffic,
in it?
well, the traffic committee feels strongly that the radar speed signs, like the one out here on Main Street, like the one that's temporarily installed on Harriman, have significant benefit, and they'd like to see 2 to 3 purchased and installed. We have to work out exactly the style, whether they're permanent, whether they're temporary, whether they're solar, whether they're battery. But as a rough estimate, and just strictly very round numbers, you're talking about 3,500 to 4,000 each. And none of that's budgeted, so the request is coming to you to consider supporting the purchase of those signs and, of course, providing the funding.
And the preference would be to put them probably, if they could be solar, so that we had put them in a permanent, some of the gateway locations, if possible. So that there's some additional research, I think, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
the idea, at either end of Broadway and pick a
Oh.
third location that, like, we would have to decide what the third location would be, or maybe there's only 2 permanent ones and 1 movable one.
And the Broadway locations have to be reviewed with DOT first, so we're not committed to that yet.
Could I ask, go ahead.
Do we have to start with 3 if we're not sure how effective these are going to be? If we have one that's movable, we could get a sense of how effective it is. I know driving down Taxter Road and seeing one of those flash 72 tickets were issued in this stretch of road last week was pretty effective. But it's not there all the time, and I think with any of those things, it becomes less effective if it's there all the time. But this is, an expense, it's not the budget. It would be good to have some ability to assess how effective it will be before committing 3 times 3,500.
That's an interesting point. I was gonna ask something a little similar, is what's the data other than anecdotal that the one out here is effective? Do we have any, like, hard data that people are going slower? No. Is there a way to do that, or we just
We
leave
can
it?
deploy a radar device again, the black box, so to speak.
Yeah.
And see.
Does that cost money, Larry, when we do that? Oh, okay.
So then it would, maybe we could say, let's get some data and evaluate how effective this is before
I mean,
committing.
I could see, I guess I'd be willing to say, kind of where you were going, maybe doing one more now. And, yeah, one, the movable one.
That's good, yeah, flexibility.
And then get the data. I hope it doesn't take a whole lot of time by a lot of people. I don't know how hard that is, but to know how effective the one on Main Street is. It's always like, it seems like it should be, it seems like, but I've been fooled enough about thinking something works and it doesn't really.
The effectiveness may vary from location to location.
Yeah, that could be, right, you don't want to, extrapolate too far, but it's.
But I agree, it's something that you can justify. It's-
You could check it at if we're considering 2 permanent locations, let's get some data on those locations to see if they are in fact effective. This is segueing into, our board of trustees priorities. But this might be something we could test for like a particular period of time, like 3 months, and be prepared at that point
I don't think you can come up with, you and Walter or the committee can come up with maybe even like 3 locations that we know. Harriman Road is one, Sunnyside Lane is one, Main Street, maybe West.
There's like
Arts
5 or
and
6
West.
locations
Yeah,
already
exactly.
listed.
So if we have those, we can go out and get the baseline data, put up the temporary one, and then if it makes an impact, maybe you then move it to the next one, do the same test, and then you say, well, did it go back up? And then maybe you leave one for, instead of do it fairly scientifically. If we could use a couple more, if we need 1 or 2 to make the study move along.
The problem is that you gotta, and it's what didn't happen on Harriman per se, but you gotta really put up the radar box. These signs do or do not collect radar. They're supposed to.
But I'm still.
You haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
So the the gray box isn't a sign, it's just a little thing that
And then they
straps.
something like that.
You always want to put that up in the exact location before you put up a sign, and then you measure it for like a few weeks, and then you put the sign up, and you're measuring impacts. And then you want to measure after the sign. If you take the sign down, you want to see, so you see it. But right now, for instance, on the Harriman one, I'm not sure that we have, were you collecting data at that point in Harriman last time, or?
That's exactly where I collected it from.
Oh, so you do have a profile for, but see, that's what you want to be able to
Great.
compare against.
And I think Harriman's one of the speedways, so I think it's a good test, because I think you can see a big improvement.
I noticed the speed limit sign went up today.
Oh, did it? Good.
I saw the marks on the Sycamore, I guess it was, on the road itself, that says slow, slow, slow when you, that's Sycamore, right?
I don't know.
Painted on the road.
That's good.
Am I the only one? So maybe I imagined it.
No,
I
I
read it.
haven't been
That's
on
your
your
Pokemon.
Anyway, I mean,
So more data.
anyway, so.
And also then maybe just to the side asking DOT if they'd allow signs at the,
It's on the list.
yeah.
And I think it sounds like we'd be okay with, if we wanted to get one more affordable one, if it needed that for the test.
Right, that's a
Yeah.
different level of commitment
Yeah.
to the budget than, great.
So I think we're overall supportive, but we'd like to see the data. And I think, rather than just throwing them up, we actually then would have,
Fine.
I don't know what materiality is, and I don't know what's statistically significant or anything like that, but to me, if it goes from, 40 to 37,
Oh, yeah,
it's huge.
probably,
It's-
yeah,
or
that's-
even 1 mile per hour slower, on average or whatever, it's probably worthwhile, but I guess we'll cross that path when we get there.
Cross that bridge.
But just to let you know, on the side,
Cross that
it won't be the full sign that has the message like Greenware. Those signs are like $6,500. The ones that you can effectively put any message you want on it. This is still just a sign,
I suppose I'd ask would like to pay for some.
just a sign like what's out here, just the number. just
What
for
is
the
that? Joe! We have a little thing.
But it can flash though if you're over, right?
It hasn't skipped.
Yeah. Do we want to quickly do the algae thing? 'Cause I think that would be.
Oh, okay.
This was algae, yeah.
Quickly?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Alice.
Thanks.
So the background to this was last year I had been talking to someone who's worked with the village periodically on various water quality things, especially in terms, I think, of Halsey Pond, but also he worked with the Parks Department with to try to get the water flow situation figured out for the rain gardens at the Nature Center last year, I guess, when they were trying to figure out. Yeah. Because there was a whole, flow issue about where water was going and how it was directed and how to keep those rain gardens actually functioning. So anyways, last fall I had asked him, or end of the summer, I'd asked him if he would put together something that was a proposal in terms of monitoring water quality at the Irvington Reservoir. One of the problems that we've had in the past about Halsey Pond was Halsey Pond effectively got extremely algified, and there was and every time you tried to figure out who to point the finger to, whether it was Ardsley Country Club or the drainage off the lawns at Legend Hollow, the argument was always, we don't have a baseline to prove that we did anything. So although you could see that the quality of Halsey Pond was significantly impacted, there was no way to, it was too late. So, that situation went on for a number of years, and then finally there was an application of an algicide that was approved that cleared up Halsey Pond pretty much for the last couple of years, at least. And I say it had to be approved because it had to be something, because Halsey Pond, like the reservoir, drains to the Hudson, so it has to be a DEC-approved application of whatever chemical you're putting in there. Anyway, so one of the things I was thinking and talking to Sven about is that we really had no way of knowing what, we know that we're beginning to get continual algae blooms every summer in the reservoir, and we've had a couple of years of fish die-offs in the reservoir. And, yes, part of the problem is a lack of oxygen in the water, lack of movement, when there's a drought condition, and et cetera, things get worse in the reservoir. But we also don't have any way to prove that some of the water quality hasn't been just generally degraded by for any particular reason or for any particular source feeding into the reservoir. So it seemed to me to be prudent to just try to get a baseline in place, which generally can either be done as 3 or 4 measurements across the, quarterly effectively, or you can do it on a monthly basis to track with a little bit more detail the variations. It would be looking at things like primary nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, but it would also be looking at some other types of potential pollutants. And so he came up with this proposal, which last fall I didn't move forward with because I thought we had too much on the plate with Brightview to even talk about anything else. Anyways, I dug this up and brought this forward because, there's, looking at the reservoir this year, we've got a pretty extensive algae bloom on it again. So the proposal would be also to do soundings to get the depth, to figure out how much sediment is in the reservoir. That's another thing that occurred at Halsey as well. As sediment builds up, you get a deoxification of the water. It happens by virtue of the decay of the and stuff in the sediment. So anyways, it's a way of keeping track of what's going on, and it might allow us to have some early warning planning as a way of preventing the reservoir from going the route of Halsey Pond.
Doing the quick addition on the back page, looks like it's about $14,500 is the proposal for a year.
If you do everything.
Yeah.
The basic is $6,800. There's also another number. If you do it more than, if you do it sort of like almost every other month or something, almost every month, it's, it comes out to be 13,200. The other numbers are really, if you want to go and start to look at analysis, if you find a problem and you want to start to go up through the feeder streams and find out where the source is coming from, that would be like the secondary numbers. Sediment sampling, well, actually, I'm not sure where that number is in here.
And I like the mention of the, inviting high school kids and working with high school kids in a very hands-on project. And from my experience, high school kids are extremely interested in environmental issues like this, and many kids love hands-on work. I'm just wondering where we could go with that. It's the kind of thing that really helps kids who somehow, like that kind of hands-on thing. But I guess my other question is Jim Inglesby, our water department at all, have an opinion on this or been part of this? No. What do you think about involving his point of view? Or
I could certainly talk to him. How could I say this? It's not a legal water source for the village anymore, so I'm not sure what concern. I mean, obviously they have the concern of ensuring now that it's being used as an actual stormwater management system, which is a good thing, definitely. But I'm not sure that the water quality issue has been a high level concern for him.
he just seems to know so much about water. But he's a resource. He might have a point of view on this if that was.
And I do think, I think it's always great to have the data, but my guess is that someone from spends expertise would I mean, if we're looking to kind of figure out where the, toxins are coming from or something, I think it'd be very valuable. But if we're more concerned with just kind of upping the quality, could you take the, $6,800 or $13,000 and do some of the remediation work instead? Could you, I don't know what it would cost to dredge to dredge it or put in bubblers or whatever, or treat it or something like that. But if that would be kind of money better spent, I mean, yes, it would be great to have the, the data to check it, but my guess is, from what we've seen in the last few years, like, there seems to be an issue that's just getting worse or just coming back.
It's true, and I agree with you that you would probably still want to do some baseline water testing to see what is in the water, and you'd certainly probably want to do depth sounding and some sediment testing to be sure, how much that. The process, what happens, I mean, not to get too technical, but there's something called a process of eutrophication, which is when sediment builds up, and then as the sediment gets thicker and all the debris of leaves and all that kind of stuff, organics, there's at some point the top layer, below the top layer of muck, it becomes anaerobic. And then at that point it doesn't decay, but it provides all sorts of source for nasty chemicals and chemical reactions into the water. So that's where the bubbling comes in, because the bubbling actually gets the bubbles into that anaerobic level and helps it to properly decay. Right. So without getting into any of that, I do think it makes a lot of sense. And what I'd really like to see, this is almost a year old, so I don't really expect us to take serious action, but I think maybe what we could do is ask maybe Sven to come in to a work session. I was going to say, and talk to us about just your question.
Is there money that we can, because I think we know there's a problem, it's just kind of the level of the problem, is it getting worse? And I think common sense says yes, every year it's going to get worse.
It looks pretty bad this year, but I don't really have.
And the weather obviously is a big thing too. If it was cooler and wetter, it would be different, but.
Exactly.
Is something happening right now, yes or no? Or
Yeah, there's a lot.
right now?
There's a lot. We don't have a fish problem, but there's a lot more algae, to my eye, a lot more algae extension than I've seen in recent years.
We have some of those really hot weeks, we might have, like it might be enough to.
Anyway, so sorry, you were.
I really want you to finish because I have a somewhat different perspective on this. I don't doubt for a second that this is a really significant problem and that you flagged it and we're seeing pictures of the algae right here. But to me, this whole discussion belongs within a discussion of how we decide what are priorities and how we decide among all of the things that we would like to take care of and improve, which we must take care of, which we prefer to take care of, which are in what order. And that, this is obviously a passionate interest of yours, which I completely support and applaud. And you've taken the ball and gotten this proposal. But I really think any particular proposal like this, we need to put it on the list. We need to look at where does this fit with everything else? Where does this fit with, the streetscape? Where does this fit with, I'm just speaking with branding here, efficiency, with things that, what are our priorities? Because that, both in terms of our time, our resources, and our money. Because I'm sitting here listening to all of these wonderful proposals, all of which cost money. The budget for next year has already been set. Where are we getting help? I think responsibly, we have to have a blueprint to say what we are.
And I don't disagree. I just have one a two-part observation. One of which is that when we have had fish die-offs, the cost of dealing with the fish die-offs have been significant. And we know that the process I know what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that the process it's not like I just invented this.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
This has been going on.
Please don't mishear me. I understand.
I know, and so if we can get it prioritized, what I would like to see is that something like this does get addressed in a way that it doesn't become an emergency.
Yes, because here's what can all so easily happen, and we all know this, whether it's in our homes, our businesses, in Village Hall, you're dealing all the time with, the things you want to get done, and then something breaks or something becomes an emergency, and then all your resources and energy goes to fixing that. Was your microwave today, was it?
And my air conditioner.
And your air conditioner, they break together, and then, oh my God. But the point mean, so but unless we have some sense of what are our priorities, what's our working list, and what is the role of each of us as trustees in getting things on this list. This is your passion. Again, I applaud it, and I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be on the list. But I looked at this and I thought, oh my God, this is priorities for a year? You know, and let me, if you could bear with me 30 more seconds. I'm the new guy in the board, right? This is the first time I'm going through this priority cycle. And to me, this combines just sort of general statements of what we'd like to see happen somewhere in Cloud Cuckoo Land with, very specific things that if we don't do it, it's going to break, to ongoing things that, we should be taking a look at this, to things that really sound like this could be a to-do list that's realistic for the year, but I don't see here. Again, this is not meant as criticism. I know what my own to-do list is, at home looks like, and the little stickies I have on the refrigerator and the computer. But I think we have to have a coherent sense of what we want to accomplish, what are our big goals, and those are those 5 areas, obviously. Under those big areas, what are sort of the aspirational things we want to get to, and then what realistically can we accomplish this year, and if we're going to do something like this, for example, what gets kicked off the list?
I had a very similar preamble to which was, because we actually went from kind of having 10 things we were going to work on that were kind of like a to-do list to more general stuff. And what I was going to propose this year is, because I think what happens is we start talking at a work session like this, and Connie says, this is an important thing. And I say, yep, we all agree. All 5, yep, that's important. Put it on the list. It goes under continued financial soundness and service efficiency. And then you say, I have another thing. And every one of them is important. So to me, I almost don't have a problem with anything on this list. And so to me, what part 2 of this is, and I probably should be, this was my genius thoughts as I'm coming on the plane with this in 3 hours, was I think we almost have to all go back and say, what's most important to each of us individually? And that's 5 things, and maybe that's the 5 top things, and maybe it is a plan to treat the bodies of water in the village, whatever, use that as an example. And then come back and talk about those things, and then almost not necessarily rank them in order, but there must be 3 or 4 that we all agree that are the most crucial, and those are the 4 we have to focus on, because all of a sudden we have, I don't know, 30 things that we want to work on, and then Brightview comes, and we never even talk about 29 of them.
Then you have 30 things that you're not working on.
Exactly right. And so I think what we have to do, and I think this was good because it kind of focused us on getting the big picture first. Like, what are we really trying to do? What's the board's goal, mission, all those things? And then we come up with comprehensive planning and the buckets. But even in the buckets, there might be 2 or 3 of these that we really care about, and 2 or 3 that are like, oh, those would be nice. And that sort of thing. I think that's where we have to almost kind of prioritize our priorities and figure out, if we can't get to these, then it'll be next year. Whatever.
And some of these are continued, so that would imply that they've been ongoing. So part of what would be helpful, I think, and again, this is not a criticism, I know this is how these lists, grow, but what would be helpful is to have them quarterly, let's check in how we do it with accomplishing these. If there's something that's, gets in the way and we can't get it done, or it's costing more than we anticipated, let's know that before the end of the year. And as we're planning the next year's, we should have a column here that shows what we accomplished.
We have a history with this list of having things continuing, like continuing next year, continuing next year. And I think that shows that one, either they're not clearly defined, or 2, they just aren't, there's not enough resource to address everything that's going on, so things drag. So.
But it gets awfully weighty when there's so much stuff dragging you down. Now, for example, continue to create efficiency by means of municipal partnering. I know we do that. That's come up a couple of times this year with the pothole things. There are 2 or 3 examples where we do that. So not that it means it's crossed off the list. You do want to continue always. You're never going to stop doing that. But let's take take a minute to, and I'm trying to put this on your list, but let's try and just in that example, just, what have we done to accomplish that particular thing? Also, we went to one of those municipal officers' dinners or whatever, and we were sitting with people from someplace else, and they were having a discussion, this was fascinating, about, when this first came out, about do you leave the big picture items on this kind of a list, or do you just push them to the side and really do the to-do list? And there were 2 points of view about that. One was just make it a to-do list, and the other was, no, you don't want to lose the big picture stuff, the things that you would always like to accomplish, because funding opportunities may come up. You want to be able to show that this is something that the village is committed to. I'm not weighing in one way or the other. I understand both parts of that argument, and I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. I think you've got 2 pages. One is the things that we are committed to, and page 2 is, and what are we going to do this year? And part of this is the stuff that we do every year, like inter-village efficiencies. Let's take some credit and give you credit for the 4 or 5 specific things we actually did on that list this year. Or something like streamline the process of building renovation permits and site approvals. That sounds to me, this might be one of those that you touch and it becomes 17 times bigger than it was before you touched it, but that sounds to me something that's relatively time limited. I'm not sure it should be one of our priorities, but that sounds like something that, okay, let's do that. Who's going to do it? What does that mean? How do we want to, and again, some of the continued stuff we should show what we're continuing. But something like ensure Irvington remains a diverse and vibrant community with a wide-ranging demographic of residents, I'm not quite sure how that gets onto a to-do list. That is operationalized by some of the stuff with, the new housing, housing committee initiatives.
But I think maybe what you're saying is a mix of aspirational stuff combined with more point detail stuff.
It's almost like guiding principles at the top. That would be here, like almost this part up here. Always keeping in mind these things, like working with other municipalities to be efficient and like having those listed. Because I always think that if I don't have, the to-do list almost becomes too simple, but you have to have kind of a clear goal that you can accomplish, otherwise you can't take it off your list. I mean, continue to enhance walkability. We can do that for the next 1,000 years. We can always continue.
And that's why it says continue.
Yeah, exactly right. But that, to me, that's a guiding principle. So, and again, I think it does help when you have when you apply for grants. Like, it's been one of our priorities, one of our guiding principles of priorities is to make it more walkable. It's been there forever. But then for this year, that's when I come back to a small number that you can actually try to accomplish. And that's where you're going to debate, because there's going to be a 6th one that Christina thinks is really important. And we're like, okay, it could be 6, but we're probably going to get to 3 or 4 or 5, and I think that's where you have to kind of make decisions. And
this is really good discussion. This is really great. I just want to make sure that Mark, having done this work on spend, how did we end this? I mean, I know it started another discussion, but
well, this is really a point task of a larger. It's a point task of a larger issue, and part of it is, environmental stewardship. So if we have a goal, I know that we have something in here that's effectively, about that, because we talk about quality of life and sustainability and all that, but there are some issues that, so this would be one of those specific actions.
I think a lot of work, I've met Sven, I know this has been discussed for a long time, I know this stuff is important, as Janice said, I didn't want to just set it down and forget about it, and I just wondered.
Like I did last fall, set it aside and said, we'll get back to it.
I mean, I applaud you for keeping us aware of this, and it sounds like, now that I feel like I've been involved in a lot of grants, and I feel like I'm getting more aware of this, when you have something like this done, and you see this list of what you can apply for, and you've got like 30 days to apply for that grant, and this is on the shelf, you go, whoa, it's got its name on it.
There are DEC water body grants, but the problem is I'm not sure that Irvington Reservoir is classified as a critical water source body.
But there's other ones with other.
No, but it's just like they, when it gets applied, like it got applied on Long Island Sound, then there's a shitload of money available for grants up and down to try to do water quality improvement.
But here's another angle. I mean, because the kids are involved and it's an educational piece, the hook is not necessarily the thing that you think, oh, this is a grant about water quality, this is a grant about hands-on education, drug prevention, and something else because of, so I
Very
find
nice, good.
keeping things like this, I mean, believe it, I not that I'm an expert yet, but I've sure seen opportunities when you just keep a very wide view about what's in something, and it's a hook. And if it works, it works. So this is very valuable.
This would fit into one of these categories, absolutely, and the fact that it's a more specific proposal is extremely good. But, for example, and again, these are just like so many different kinds of things on this list. So, analyze review of proposed changes to operations technology and policies that will upgrade the efficiency and reduce cost to village departments. Well, there's a mouthful. So, is there a way to break, what department maybe should we look at first?
Well, one of the things we talked about, I know, in rubric, under this rubric has been, for instance, like going all electronic for the building department and site plan stuff. And I know there's been great steps in that direction, but we're not 100% there yet.
Okay, but can we, that's just huge, and so non-specific. What are we talking about? Which operations, which policies? That's clearly one of them, which department? So that's one, that's specific and clear. Are there some that are more important than others? Are there some that, if this is like something we're going to be doing, we know that some things we take on are gonna take like a long time to do. Is there something we can say that we're going to do it in this order, or that this looks like the most important? We always remembering that something like breakthrough can come and knock the whole thing.
The other thing is that, apart from, there's a certain level of, what was the Rumsfeld quote about, things you know, things you don't know.
The known, it's the known
whatever.
and the unknown.
I don't know why I would even bring up Rumsfeld here. The point is that we know, for instance, we can look and we can see that the whole process of site plan approval is fraught with a lot of delays, a lot of costs, and a lot of inefficiency in terms of how internally and how the public interacts. And there's been discussions, and there's a lot of movement already through the building department to clean up a lot of that, and there's still some steps left that have to be done. So, yes, but then on the other side, if you look, that's just one example, but I guess it's because the unknown unknowns, it's like, if you had someone come in and take a look at the village, where else could they find these significant efficiencies that could be had by changing procedures, operations, or whatever? I mean, we've talked about it only in passing when we talked about, is there such a thing? I brought it up as, it's again, a skeet shooting, but things like natural gas garbage trucks, how does that change the cost profile? But we don't necessarily have the expertise.
Right, that's all
Right,
right. So
which is really the part about each of us picking our priority. We don't necessarily have the expertise, or any of us, except you.
Or should we?
But no, you do have a particular area of expertise, but how do we decide? I know what one of the things I'm most committed to is affordable housing and the increasing the diversity of the population of the village, but I'm not going to say that should absolutely be more important than what happens in the reservoir. It should be more important than the streetscape. I'm going to argue that it should, but that's what a robust discussion among us should be about. And then what can we, and we may all decide that something, I don't want to be, but some particular project we would all love to see accomplished. Oh, moving DPW. So Larry and I had a lovely
We never got debriefed on that.
And we had a lovely meeting with 3 very pleasant people who basically said, we'll get back to you. But, so that was several hours of your time. It was obviously worth doing. We have to pursue it. But that might not be something, moving the DPW facility, and that's why you took it off the list, right? Because realistically, it's not something we can work on this year. We can continue to try and nibble at it and nudge at it, but that's not going to happen this year. So how do we not lose the things we'd really like to accomplish, but also not have such a humongous list of vagueness that we don't really do anything?
Well, can I jump in a sec? Okay. There's the role of the comprehensive plan, and how that document, if my understanding of comprehensive plans is correct, that document should be a long-range planning document for the municipality. Am I right that that's what they're viewed as?
For development.
For land use.
Just for land use,
Well-
not for other priorities? Okay. Now, I was thinking, that.
It doesn't govern the efficiencies in your village.
Okay, all right. Well, then it doesn't quite work as the overall principle that I was kind of thinking of it as. But I know that there was a lot of discussion, I guess it's now almost a year ago, that we should be reviewing the comprehensive plan. And then we kind of modified that because some parts probably could be left alone, if I remember this right, but other parts really need intense look at.
Right.
And-
Right, I think the last we left it with you as a board was that Mary Ann and I were trying to educate ourselves by meeting with some well-respected planners so we could better understand the types of approaches that they've taken to updating the comprehensive plan. We were a little we never felt comfortable with just pulling a committee together, or recommending to you, to pull a committee together and let them go at it for 18 months, give them about $150,000 or $200,000 to work with a consultant and come up with a new comprehensive plan. That's not what we feel comfortable with. We think that the plan that we have is good and relevant in many areas, but that there are targeted areas that need to be looked at, and we wanted to understand how planners would approach that. And we've met with 3 planners so far, and I think that's probably all that responded to our request. We put 4 or 5 letters out there, and 3 of them responded, and we had 3 very good meetings, and we'll be prepared to report back to you as to what we think is the next logical step on that very soon.
What do you see as the connection between the comprehensive plan and this kind
Yeah,
of?
that's kind of where I was going. It might be under.
I mean, there are a lot of areas, not all, but there are a lot of areas that need attention, need updating to reflect, current situations in the world. And I'm not saying every one of them is covered in this planning document, or priorities document, but some important ones are. And, they include, the list that we put together, the list of areas that we all thought were areas that might need updating. And all the planners looked at that list, by the way, and they feel that you have a pretty good handle on what you want. You know what I mean? Like that they were pleased to see that. It wasn't an open-ended list.
We have to be reminded of which things.
Well, it was studying the Broadway corridor and studying the Main Street area, the vitality, the rules that you have in place for Main Street. We talked about Lower Main Street with the potential movement of property down there. There was a variety of other things as well, but
So they're definitely in that comprehensive plan. Our role is to bring a vision to it, and those are discussing very big priorities, right, where we see things going and then manifesting them into this document.
But each discussion is a little bit different. It's not just pulling together one big comprehensive plan. You're building off of a plan that's already relevant. In fact, most of the recommendations, as you know, were implemented, so it's extremely relevant. It's not as though it was just, pie in the sky and it never got done. But, looking at sea level rise or affordable housing and some of the new, things that have gone on in the world related to that, settlements and other case laws.
Walkability.
Walkability is very different than maybe studying the Broadway corridor or looking at the laws and rules you have applicable to businesses on Main Street. They're just different things. They have different constituencies that are interested in those things. It's not, you don't just pull together a single land use committee and say, here, go at it. You ask the question, you ask specific targeted questions. How would you like to see property developed on Broadway? Do you want it the way it is? Do you want it different? Do you want it drastically different? You know, whatever. And you do that in the face of not being faced with a particular project or particular properties on the market or anything like that. And the answer might be you want it the same way it is, and that's fine. You memorialize that, and you don't consider changing it in the future. I mean, to any great degree. Main Street's another example, but it's a whole series of different questions. It might be more, you know, what types of businesses do you want to attract to Main Street? Do you want it exactly the way it is? Do you want it different from what it is? You know what I mean?
The relationship to the waterfront.
Exactly. And there's a whole, so it's a very targeted, very targeted approach to it. But it would, in the end, it would provide you with some additional answers that would fold into the existing report that you have. That's the way we're seeing it so far.
But then some of the things that are on here that we're trying to figure out where they go, some of them do go into those chapters that we could, so that's a bit of a job
Right,
to get,
right.
to move
There's
those
some
out of the
flooding problems, or
Yeah.
there's something about, that would, I'm not sure if that relates to the comprehensive plan, there was something that struck me.
Yeah, the flooding thing, yeah. Continue engineering, quality of life.
Well, walkability, include streets, that's certainly.
Yeah.
The whole category that says research and implement appropriate smart growth policies, that whole thing is impacted by the comprehensive plan. You know, traffic and pedestrian safety is not, in the context of complete streets, is a very good discussion. We'll pick up a lot of that.
Here's what I was for, the focus efforts to educate consumers on the importance of work on workflows. That's something that would be related to what was in the comprehensive plan, I think, in terms of water
Yes, I
management.
think so, yes.
Also,
Actually,
I was thinking that we could also,
Well, then the entire wetlands and watercourse law came out of the last comprehensive plan. It didn't exist.
right, but it does, but,
So that was a development issue that impacted directly stormwater.
right, but now we're talking about something else that's more of an educational behavior thing that isn't
Right.
really code-based at all, so.
Oh, no, I wasn't focusing on the educational side, but just stormwater impacts and flooding.
but when we talk about, in a couple of places, we talk about efforts to educate the community and whatever. Another thing, what we're having at this is to kind of, okay, who should be doing it? Because it can't be only us, because that's just too much. So some of the things that improve public outreach and education on topics of sustainability, my Green Energy Task Force is like tailor-made to do little else than continue to liaise with them and make sure the community.
Can I disagree with you on that for one reason?
Sure.
I don't disagree with you as in the abstract. I disagree with you in the reality of what's been accomplished by the group. And that's a different discussion.
That's a different discussion.
But I do agree with the philosophy that you spin it out to different committees that,
Right, so affordable housing, we've got a housing committee, so.
traffic committee or.
Yes, and we,
So you do the heavy lifting with guidance.
right, so.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not all of us trying to do all of it, but let's just figure out what are the priorities, who's gonna do it, what are the bite-sized pieces? What are the bite-sized pieces that we can accomplish between this night and next June 30th?
Yeah, that's a very different list from this. I was here when we started doing this, Brian and I, right, we were both, and I think it's evolved, and I think you have to start somewhere. And by not even thinking about priorities, it was like, glad we did this, but you're right, we can make it better, right? Yes, we're on the
When we
plane.
last did this, it was almost like we had so many things we were listing as like a to-do list that it was overwhelming. So that's when Larry said, well, you know, those 4 things
Go together.
are all kind of fits. And
Yeah.
we said, yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
that makes sense.
And then it was, you know, almost to break the stalemate of going through it. But I think now we've kind of done that well. We've put it into slots, and now we can look at the slots and break them out and say, yes, this is a
Within a
great,
year.
this is a great goal, but we can probably do this one thing that relates to that goal, these 2 things.
Right, and maybe we can say there are 5 points under financial soundness. 4 of them remain things that we are committed to, that we will continue to track, but there's one thing, we can do one piece of it this year, so that we don't lose the things we can do.
Yeah.
While we're busy looking at this whole big, long list.
And even if it's just a specific item that is under the broader topic of it, you know what I mean? Like it's, as you said, maybe it's analyze, review, and propose changes to just to reduce costs of those departments. Maybe this year we just say, let's pick one.
Exactly.
Just the water department this year, or just the,
Yes, exactly.
the clerk's office,
Or
or
recreation,
recreation
or,
department,
you know,
whatever.
Right, whatever,
Pick one.
just pick one.
And then next year we'll focus on a different one.
Exactly. But when we have a big broad thing, like let's look at all of the ways we can improve all of the departments, nothing is gonna happen. It's like, you know, my goal this year was to clean out my closets. So it's the whole meeting in closet going, oh my God, and closing the closet door again. But I know if I start with a room, a cabinet, a drawer, you know.
And I think too, if each one of us has something we're passionate about, we're gonna make sure that it doesn't slip through the cracks, even if Brightview comes. We're gonna say, well, we know I haven't talked about, my, making sure all the bricks are red in town, initiative.
My dead goat.
Yeah, we're my Pokemon tournament every Tuesday night. And then if we do get Brightview, I still gonna say, well, we haven't talked about it in 3 weeks because Brightview's been in. Next week, I wanna have it on the agenda.
Right, then we have to make sure the agenda reflects our priorities and that we time limit
Yeah.
certain other topics.
We don't do a good job on that.
Well, do better.
Not, not just, I'm not just talking about us, but even when we have people come in,
Oh, the 3-minute rule?
or we have someone come in and present something to us, and 45 minutes later, they're still droning on about something that no one gets much.
So usually one person gets concerned.
Well, maybe we need to just, I said in general, now I'm sounding like Walter, so I like to really give, especially when we do have, look, sometimes things get more complicated, and it's important to give it time.
And people do need to be heard, and I am a great believer in process, that not everything people say is goal-directed. People aren't gonna stand up and say, this is what I want to accomplish, this is how I think you should do it, thank you very much, goodbye. People need to process. I'm gonna say the same things they're gonna repeat what somebody else said, that's human nature. But our job is to control the agenda a bit in terms of making sure we give relatively more time to the higher priority items.
Most of it's
That's fair.
our own talking. I mean, we do more talking here than people from the outside. I mean, but we can do that.
I think you get in trouble when you try to go into problem-solving mode on the spot.
Right, and to
It's very
say,
difficult
right,
to do.
and more to say, okay, this is,
And that's
we
where,
have to solve this problem now.
right, and
We
that's where
have
the
to
person,
assign somebody.
and that's, as to pick up on your theme, that's where the person now has basically reset your agenda. You may have had a different agenda, now you're solving their problem at that moment on the spot, which is difficult to do.
But sometimes we do it even by ourselves here.
It's human nature in some respects. You want to try to figure something out.
We do also always want to, when we get people in the audience, allow them to speak, because,
Of course.
you want them.
Of course, and you want everybody to have a chance to
Yeah.
get heard. And that, so somebody's gonna go late because there's a lot of people here who have something to say. That's fine. If
Right.
people are that passionate to show up, and that's fine.
But I don't know there's track and tripwires either. I mean, there's tripwires for projects, things that are supposed to, we do have a project list, and we have the open items list and a general project list that we look over. But we don't do that often. We do it maybe once a month, or, once every other month in the summertime. It's important to keep up with that, I think, because, I don't know how the major project list, or whatever it's called, how that will eventually dovetail with projects out of the priority list, but it seems to me that there's something similar in those two lists, or should be.
But I wanted to agree with something Brian said earlier, which we have used effectively hooks again for grants, because it's something that is in some priority list that's been helpful. If you could put in your grant, this has been a priority for our municipality for the last 5 years. And, we're committed.
Money too.
Yeah, we need money, and we've continued to discuss it.
We've put our, we've championed this particular activity, we haven't been able to budget for it, that's where you come in as their lead grant person.
So I think we're all kind of going in the same direction. I don't know how we make this happen, but it's like there there are two different lists. There's the, I can do this in a year list, what goes on that, and then there's the longer term priorities list. And then there's the comprehensive plan, of which some of it incorporates. Is that fair to say that we are kind of on that?
I think that's where we.
So, and I think one other thing I'd add is there's some things that are more guiding principles that can be almost in the preamble.
Yep.
Of the
Yes,
list.
it can be, yeah, sure.
But, when we make the, I mean, I think what I envision is almost keeping this very similar to what it is, moving some things around though, and saying, this part's fine, and then saying, there are certain things that we look to do in almost all of our projects when applicable, and then list those things like, working with other municipalities, or whatever. Then we say, for this year, we, as a board, we've identified these three as critical, things we want to work on, and then these are also, pick a number, 3 more, 7 more, 2 more. That's very important as well. Additionally, we have identified many other projects that are important to the village.
ER list over
And then
here.
have those. And I think what we have to do is kind of propose them now, almost, champion, 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, of each of our top things. And my guess is we're going to have overlap, and the 3 top ones are going to be very obvious, or 4, whatever the number is. It doesn't really matter. But I think that's kind of
As long as we're not resetting to zero previous commitments that everyone was, there's certain things that for instance, questioning whether or not the comprehensive plan needs to be updated. I think that's one of those things that, we know through quite, maybe that's a case of overlap, so we'll leave that one alone.
Yeah.
The other one was, I do really think there has to be trackability, so there can be accountability. So
Yes.
when you have your list of, and this is where it differs from what you were saying, is it's just a simple edit of this. When you have your 5 things or 6 things or whatever number of things for the year, then those should move on to the major project list and you start to track them.
well, I think too, like for those 3 or 4 or 5
Yeah.
whatever numbers, I think you have to take a second step, and you almost have to come up then with work with all project plans, where you actually say,
With dates and with,
Yeah.
and with
But that's how
reporting
you
on
do it.
during
But I
the
think-
course of the year,
Exactly.
so that at the end of the year, if we accomplish 4 out of 6 projects, we can give ourselves a huge round of applause. And we have to take a look at why we didn't with the other 2. Is it just that it's gonna take longer than we expected?
something
But
else.
then you have to consider when we're picking out our 6 most important things for next year, wait, we still got these
Those
2
two.
from last year, so.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a multi-year process, but with each year focused on, this is what we really think we can and must accomplish
And
this year.
with
And it's gonna have
trackability-
funding implications too.
And with trackability, you know where you're starting to run into problems of resources or time or whatever else.
And you can flag that early, rather than at the end,
Earlier.
2 minutes was said, we didn't get to it. Even though 2 months into it, we're running into a problem here because we thought we could do this, but this is why we can't.
And I think also if one of those top 3 or 4, assuming they're not all accomplished, one of them isn't on our work session agenda, it should be a red flag, or it isn't on, the next meeting's agenda or whatever, because we've now not only kind of looked at it cerebrally, and we've actually gotten into the weeds of it a little bit, and we've all, again, agreed that these are the focuses, so we should be, having them again and again until we get knocked
Well,
off.
if there's input needed, though.
If there's input.
In other words, or you have points in projects where
Nothing goes
you've,
exactly.
you've touched that, you've spun the plate, and now you're onto something else, and
Yeah.
you may need to go back to it, but it may not be
Yeah,
every.
but I do think that it's, I think the updates, I think sometimes, it's frankly, you have, every day you must have 50 things you're doing, and then that doesn't include all the calls from the people. But I think if we gave you clearer direction on certain things, it'd be very helpful to you too.
I would welcome it.
Yeah, because, sometimes really.
Yeah,
it's,
Of course you would, because, anybody who has walked into Village Hall, everybody walks into his office and.
Has their problem du jour.
Right, and that's okay, but I think, was it the 2 of us had a conversation, and I used the word lint?
Yeah.
Right, yes.
There's lint you have to deal with, and you don't have to deal with it, and that's fine, that's okay. But the fact is it has to be dealt with, so that dealing with, getting clearer direction on the board's priorities would allow me to better address all of that, including the lint that you don't see from day to day, you know what I mean, so. or
Right,
maybe
and then you can also say, okay, what?
Blue sky.
I know, I've been looking at it. It's a great show here.
Yeah, it's a background set.
So then you can also flag for us, say, you know, I'm running into a roadblock getting this done for this reason, and then we can make some decisions. So and it might be, okay, so back off for now, or it might be, let's take something else off your plate so that you can focus on this. But yes, that has to come from us.
And I think one of the keys is that, well, we were good at coming up with things that were important and worthy, and we all supported. But the problem is there's 50 of those. I think what we have to do is really break it down and prioritize the priorities. And it doesn't mean that it's because, I have something I really like and everyone else is like, yeah, it's good, but, put it on the list. But, I think that getting that makes it easier on you and on us because, now it's, because you almost don't want to take any of the things off. But we can't work on them all,
Okay, I have one thought, and I think somebody was starting on this. We each know what we know, and we each know what we're passionate about. What don't we know about what could be influencing the future of the village that we're just not recognizing that somebody or a professional or somebody who makes a living at municipal government, are there things, and how do we deal with that? Who could advise us on things that might be slipping through the cracks because we don't happen to have somebody here who knows about that?
Well, I think one of my jobs is to make sure that things are on course and stay on course, and that you don't trip over or miss something that you were supposed to address. I can think of any number of topics in the last year or more that I don't think any of you would say you were experts on, but you had to deal with them because the department to you to deal with. Revaluation is the biggest example. I know it's a larger topic and it has a longer history, but all of that was.
Experts.
You became experts, and a year and a half ago, you probably wouldn't have been able to say that, or wouldn't have wanted to say that, and it probably wasn't even on any of these lists necessarily.
We wouldn't necessarily want to say it now, but we do.
No, yeah, right. It's hard to say. You have to be right.
But yeah, I think that's
But that's a great example.
Yeah.
It comes out from.
So
left
yes,
field.
you're definitely a conduit for stuff that
Yeah,
comes to the attention of the legal and functioning of a municipality,
Right.
and boy, we better deal with this.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily get on the priority list, or maybe
Well,
it does, if
well,
you know
I mean,
about it ahead of time.
right. That's an example of you really couldn't afford to not pay attention.
Oh, yeah.
You had, with the impact on the residents and all that. So that's not something that I think any of us can sit here and try. We're going to be dealing with revaluation 2 years from now, and, we'll be devoting a significant amount of time to it. That's nothing that we would have ever expected. I think the idea of narrowing your list down to a meaningful number that you are committed to of things that you'd like to get done is most important to me. I've said this in any forum, and I'll say it publicly. It was extremely frustrating to devote a significant amount of time to a project like Brightview that came through the door, and then walk away and not have anything to show for it. So, and that's okay. I understand how it all plays out, and it wasn't a criticism about that. But from my standpoint, it was frustrating because that was an unanticipated thing that came up. We devoted a lot of time to, and got nothing for it. So I think it's much better. Things that are on our list of things that we would like to accomplish are things that everyone's behind, and that's ideally, not necessarily behind exactly how it's going to get executed. There's always discussions, but the concept of the things that you decide.
So if there's disagreement among us about a particular way of proceeding, a particular concept, we should know that before we.
Yeah, I think there are probably a bunch of examples of things where they're on the list because one person's passionate about it, but if push comes to shove, another person may not be passionate about it. So do you really want your staff chasing that around and spending time if you don't even know that you're in agreement on it? You know what I mean? So, and I'm just talking in abstract, but you know what I'm saying. So the things that end up on the list, if they, I'd like to, would be nice if there's some sort of an agreement, at least on the concept of it. How they get addressed is a different story, and that's something that needs to be.
There's a goal.
That's right, the means, no one can predict that, you have to work your way through it, but if everyone, but if you go in trying to figure out what the means are, and figuring out how to accomplish it, if you go in knowing that everyone is full behind this, and that you want to get to the end goal, and all of you do, then you're gonna come up with the means, you know what I mean?
And I do think that when we go back and prioritize, and I'm not gonna say we should all do it tonight, I think it'd be good for the next meeting. I think we're gonna come up with 3 or 4 that are unanimous, or 4 out of 5 of us feel passionate about it. I mean, I can just kind of see, looking over people's papers, we have
Seeing what circles and stars.
You're looking at my stars.
So, I don't think it's gonna be, a, debate with a PowerPoint presentation to show you what I think should be on the list. I think it's gonna be an obvious one, there's gonna be several obvious ones, and then 1 or 2 we might discuss and say, yeah, it's probably worth it, we'll put it on as the 5th one or whatever. So I think that we can do that, and then I think we should also try to limit it just to make it reasonable to try to accomplish those things, as opposed or 2 thrown on, we can do that, but that's on the,
That's
we
a
get through these
different
5, we start tackling the other ones.
So we're not all picking one, we're picking.
One or 2 or 3, we can rank your top 5 or whatever, and see if we have.
So, right, the ones that we would really like, well, we would really like to see accomplished each year, and let's see how much overlap there is,
Yeah.
and how much, and if there's one, if I'm the only one who thinks counting the actual number of geese in stage are over. And it's off the list.
Right.
Well, I think we're moving forward. There's a lot of, going, the process of submitting this, and, is there a system that you think would work efficiently, or is this we email somebody?
I mean, I think if you're really trying to boil it down to just your, top 3 to 5 or whatever it is, I don't see why emailing it around. I can find it. And I'll just compile it, yeah, that's all. I mean, that's exactly what all I need.
End by Friday.
Yes. We've all seen this, we've all been.
And maybe things are on the list.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Hard to believe, but maybe.
Maybe specifics.
But by not including something, it doesn't mean that we don't think it's important. It's that we don't think it can be done within a year. Is that the one?
Or the other way too, that these are the things we feel, if we're gonna devote energies, we wanna focus on these things rather than those things.
Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be done in a year, but we can be making significant progress on it.
How does that relate to things that are being in progress?
Yeah, things that are in, like your example of the municipal cooperation stuff.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking about that, I'm thinking
Oh,
Solar panels.
oh, yeah.
or, sign code, solar panels,
Yeah.
parking plan.
Those are continuing,
Right,
right?
but
So where do
are
they
those
go?
part of the same,
I think
are they the same pool because they're making use of the same resources?
I think we should look at them and say, do we want, these are what we've now, by default, said, or de facto said, that these are the top, most important goals. Maybe we can say,
And
is
maybe that's the list you could give us, what are the 5 things that you are working on now? Whether, when, or who said these were important, or however they came to the top of the heap. And so if we find that the disconnect is that the 5 things Larry is working on, because somewhere along the line, this got put on his plate and he was told to do it, have no bearing to what we think is important, that there's, we need to know that.
But before we get too far down that line, remember, a lot of things, I bet you a certain number of those happen because we have residents come before us
Of course.
and tell us the problems, the urgency. The reason I want to point that out is just because things like Brightview, I mean, one could have sat there with a crystal ball and said, oh, that property is going to become a problem because we're going to have to address whatever. But no one knew when it was going to come before us, as an actual thing. So there's always going to be interim driven.
Sure.
Of course.
And so we have to have a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, but Brightview is a good example of a larger thing, and that's why I do think that, and not that I'm lobbying for anything here, but I think the comprehensive plan is an important document
Right.
to update at this stage. Brightview is a perfect example that if you, as a board, had done your comprehensive planning and updated your comprehensive planning even more recently than you did, that the answer they would have never come to you, basically. They would have just, if you had made the decision ahead of time, that this is what we want to see on Broadway, which is basically residential or existing or no change, right? If that's what the decision was. And I'm not saying it is, but if it was, then when an application like that walks through the door to change your zoning, it doesn't need to be entertained. Not from day one, it doesn't need to be entertained.
Or conversely, if we said in the context of the comprehensive plan that we would consider certain types of businesses on Broadway and define them.
Yeah.
And if
And
the
then when
senior
those
assisted living
applications-
was one of them, then we perhaps might have had to evaluate it a little bit differently because it already had a foot in the door.
And it's something you've already said, you've entertained. Anyway, I think comprehensive planning is an important element, that's all I'm saying. It should be on the list.
So that should be one of the
That
things
should
we
be one of
do.
the things. Oh,
Happens to
that's
be-
one.
It happens to be something that's in progress also, but it's kind of in its infancy, so.
I think this is good. I mean, if we can all get the list to Larry, he can,
Yeah, I'll compile it and see what it looks like.
So we're only emailing each other or we're all emailing Larry?
I guess we can copy everybody, I guess. Should we not? And then we don't want to influence everyone.
Well, I don't give, however you want to handle it, but I think
Yeah,
something
someone's
should come to me.
I think something, if you want
You want me to
to get
compile
done,
it?
better go somewhere.
I think we send it to Larry.
Let's send everything to Janice.
I think on there, it's just our top 2 or 3, or
I think
Whatever.
so.
If you have-
3 to 5.
Yeah, if you have 5.
3 to
Yeah,
5.
whatever, you might say these three are equally important to me, or, you know, or this one is of paramount importance, and then we do the horse trading. And no, it is horse trading, there's one that's paramount importance to everybody, and it means 3 things have to go off the list, and so be it.
Right.
Can I just ask a question though? Because I don't want to be like, for example, I look at something like, and it's because now I'm serving as the liaison to the fire department. And having just been taken on a personal tour by Chief Tarracone, I mean, knowing what's going on at the firehouse and how kind of dire the situation in terms of spaces, I mean, is it realistic to list that as a priority item?
I mean, just, if that's what is of most importance, then list it out and we'll have to hash it out. I mean,
Okay,
yeah, it's as valid as any other priority as far as I'm concerned. Whether it's more or less than others, I can talk about.
And how doable this might be.
well, that's my
Yeah,
thing.
there's the doable and
And I
there's,
do think
but
that there's,
we can't really evaluate how.
there also will be kind of those top 5, 3, 5, 6, whatever, just top priorities you have. But then there can also be things where maybe you say, this is also really big. It doesn't have to be our top 5, but it's also going to be, it's not going to be a 6-month project. It's going to be like a multi-year thing where maybe there's a piece of it that could start, that's not even going to be taking up any of our time or Larry's
Well,
time.
the fire department is precisely that, because there's already been a complete study, and there's been look at what the needs are, and look at what an ideal would be, and then backtracking to what a less than ideal would be, and, you know, as far as I can tell, it's kind of like, until we get a new place to put the box is the box. You know, it's not much we can do to improve conditions without totally moving them off that side.
So I'm hearing also that there's going to be things we want to do this year and things we want to start this year, knowing that they may be more than 1 year, but it's important to start. So maybe those are 2 different categories to look at.
Potentially, and I think maybe they come from if you look at the top 5, your top 5 or whatever, 3 of them, it's impossible to do this year, but they should have to get started. You can't just say, well, we're not going to accomplish it, so we can't do it. I think that if those are the most important things to you that are going to affect the village the most, in your opinion, those should be on the list, whether it's going to take 20 years or 20 minutes, you know, that's
Well,
We might end up having 2 lists.
That's my 2 list again, you know, so I think if we take this conversation, I'm just thinking out loud here, and Larry kind of starts off the email saying, please create the list called, and then create if there's a second list that's the longer term. In other words, make it clear what's happening in this email chain is that, and not this, and if this is, you know, a second category.
How about if
that's
we
where
don't
you
have
can
it
put it.
Let's not have an email chain, let's just all send it to.
Send
Right, okay, fine.
the top
But
5
just-
priorities.
Just start with the top 5, how they break down into short-term, I mean, deciding what's accomplishable in 1 year.
Okay, so then we don't have-
or
Well, we
multiple
need,
years.
you are leaving it open.
We don't know
meeting.
that.
Yeah, I know, that's what I mean, and I want to know if it's items are first.
Yeah.
I
Oh, they are.
plan about surprises that happen that you don't expect, and as an example, that actually pulls together a number of areas, but the microgrid stuff, which we thought was kind of interesting to pursue, and the more we hear about it, the more it has some real possibility, but it's not really, so it takes a certain amount of brain power to neurons to process and track it.
But I think that's a perfect example of we don't have enough information to even decide where it belongs on the list. It has the potential of either never being on the list or being at the very top of the list. That's how
Yeah,
important
But
the
you
project
you
is.
still have to spend time on it.
yeah.
Well,
So it's, so, you know, it has to be
yeah,
somewhere on your,
listen, a project like that is once in a career, so you work on it to work on it because it's that important. Or it may not be anything.
it may
you know
be
what I mean?
anything, right?
Which is fine, that's whatever it is, but I think that due diligence, you owe to the whole process, so that you can't.
Unfortunately, these won't be the only 5 things Larry works on.
No, and that's okay, it's,
But the microgrid hasn't been taking that much of your time yet.
no, that part's fine.
Unlike the,
Community choice act.
yes.
I feel like we're carrying the whole county on that one.
Oh, jeez, I know.
We had a lot of,
Between you and Mary Ann.
yes. we had a
Feels
lot
like you
of
guys are
input.
carrying it.
Seems like it.
Well, there was a lot of stupidity.
Yeah.
No, I don't know about
The
that.
village will be honored by the county for helping.
We'll get a proclamation.
Proclamation, thanks.
We can hang it on the walls.
A gold plug.
All right, well, I feel all right about this.
I think we can get something that can actually
Better
guide
than
our meetings
no
as opposed
So
to.
no breakdowns between short-term and long-term, just,
Okay.
Start with top 5.
just what you think your top 5 priorities are,
This thing,
and then
these
we'll
things.
Bigger than doing it.
we'll parse it after that, okay?
Because honestly, I've been feeling since I came on the board in the middle of breakthrough, so this was like,
Yeah.
but I feel a little bit like I've been playing whack-a-mole, you know.
You can take care of
It
it.
has been, no doubt.
Yeah, so, all right.
Well, now we have to change the metaphor. It's Pokemon Go.
Oh, sorry.
You're like chasing them all over.
I can't get beyond whack-a-mole, that's,
Yeah, it's easier now.
it's easier to visualize. Is that it? All right,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed, you can stay.